The true story of the 300 Spartans. In June 480 BC, a powerful Persian army crossed the Dardanelles via two raft bridges to launch a brutal invasion of Greece. Led by the great king Xerxes, they were heading towards Thermopylae, a narrow mountain pass on the east coast of Greece, 136 kilometers northwest of Athens. The pass was a rugged landscape, filled with thick brush, thorns, steep hillsides, and a harsh climate where rain and sun were common. Soon, the 6.4-kilometer-long pass, the quickest and easiest route for the advance from the plains of Thessaly into central Greece, would become the scene of an epic three-day battle that would become legendary in literature and history as a prime example of heroism against steep odds. Much of what we know about the Battle of Thermopylae, and the Greek-Persian wars in general, comes from the Greek historian Herodotus, who wrote in the 5th century BC. Other sources include the Sicilian historian Diodorus Siculus, who based his accounts in parts from the 10th century BC on the earlier Greek historian Ephorus, the ancient Greeks Plutarch and Theseus of Cnidus, the modern historian Georges Bardo-Grandi, who surveyed the terrain of the pass, and, in part, the tragic writer Aeschylus. No Persian account of the battle survives, and many statistics on it remain ambiguous, such as the number of men in Xerxes' army, which is a matter of endless debate. Herodotus states that the Persian king commanded a total of 2.6 million men, while the poet and historian Simonides recorded an invading army of 4 million, while Theseus puts the force at 800,000. Modern scholarship, based on the logistics capabilities of the time, estimates the Persian army at between 120,000 and 300,000. One thing all sources agree on is that the battle was motivated by both resentment and ambition. For a decade earlier, Xerxes' father Darius had been defeated by the Greeks at the Battle of Marathon, which had successfully halted the first Persian invasion of Greece. In this new invasion, Xerxes was determined to retaliate by conquering all of Greece and expanding his empire westward. The obstacle that stood in his way in the summer of 480 BC was a league of Greek city-states that rarely came together because of their feuds in normal times. Some of the members of this alliance had to end their conflicts to fight the greater threat from Persia. Athens, which had supported the Greek cities during the Ionian uprising against Persia and had defeated Darius in 490 BC, led the alliance with Sparta. Themistocles, an Athenian politician and general, led a naval resistance by blocking the Persian fleet at the Strait of Artemisium. Leonidas, king of Sparta, commanded the land army at Thermopylae. This consisted of 300 royal guards from his own city-state. These warriors have been the subject of countless books, movies, poems, and songs, including the film 300, and 7,000 lesser-known soldiers, including 1,000 Phocians, 700 Thespians, and 400 Thebans. Leonidas, who was in his 60s, had ascended the throne about a decade earlier after his half-brother and previous king, Cleomenes, had died childless. The 300 Spartans were an elite force of warriors, handpicked by the king himself. All of them had to be heirs, as he knew their chances of surviving the battle were slim and wanted to ensure that he would have a successor. Plutarch writes that when the king was asked before the battle, Leonidas, "Why are you fighting so many enemies with so few men?" he replied, "I have enough men, for they would die." Xerxes' forces easily advanced through Thracian, Macedonian, and Thessaly, as the people in these areas were alarmed and surrendered without fighting. However, when he arrived at Thermopylae in mid-August, the Persian king faced stiff resistance from prepared forces. Leonidas planned to stall Xerxes' forces at the narrow mountain pass, where the advantageous terrain could act as a force multiplier for the outnumbered Greek army. The narrow valley would prevent the Persians from using their larger forces or cavalry. Meanwhile, the Greek fleet would focus on defeating the Persian forces at the straits over the nearby island of Euboea. That was the plan, but Leonidas was dismayed when he arrived at Thermopylae and found that the Anaphia, a mountainous route, would allow the invaders to bypass his position. However, it was too late to change strategy, as the fleet was already in position. He ordered Phocian warriors to guard the route while the Spartans repaired the walls protecting the open space in the middle of the pass. Xerxes encamped near Thermopylae and waited for 4 days. He believed that the Greek army would be overwhelmed by fear and retreat when they saw the powerful Persian army. As Plutarch records, he sent a message to Leonidas to persuade him to lay down his arms, but the Spartan king, according to Plutarch, simply replied with Molenlebe, or take them. On the 5th day, the Persians began their attack. As Leonidas had expected, their advantage in numbers was useless in such a confined space. Although the warriors were brave and tough, they were not trained for such terrain and lacked heavy weapons. Persian swords were shorter than Greek swords and shields were smaller, and bows and arrows could not penetrate the defenders' sturdy shields. On the contrary, the terrain was suitable for the Greek soldiers, who were accustomed to fighting in phalanx formations, where the warriors stood close together, shoulder to shoulder, facing the enemy with shields facing each other. This battlefield was an especially good opportunity for the Spartans to demonstrate their skills in battle, the result of their whole lives, body and soul, for the army. The Greek warriors pushed back Xerxes' soldiers time and time again, and the Persian losses mounted before the end of the first day of battle. Xerxes gathered 10,000 of his best soldiers. The Greeks called these elite soldiers under the nobleman Hydarnes devils because they seemed to make up for the losses so readily that they seemed infinite in number. But even they could not subdue the Greek warriors and were soon forced to retreat. It is said that Xerxes, watching the battle from his golden throne at the foot of a nearby hill, had to jump from his seat several times in anger at his own failure. The next day the Persians made another failed attack, but on the same day a Greek shepherd in the area, whose name would later become a symbol of treason, named Euphrates told Xerxes the secret of the victory. The Anaphia path, which ran along a ridge and around the back of the Greek stronghold at the eastern end of Thermopylae. In exchange for a large reward, he promised to guide the Persians along it. According to Herodotus, Xerxes commissioned Hydarnes and his demigods to carry out the attack. They left the camp at the hour when the lamps were lit and set out on foot through the night. Leonidas called a meeting of his generals when he learned that his forces were surrounded. The question was whether the Greeks should retreat or stand firm. Although defending his stronghold was impossible, he was determined that the 300 Spartans and a number of Thebans would stand and fight. His military honor and discipline made surrender impossible. For the Spartans, their only two choices were victory or death. According to Herodotus, another reason for this decision was the prophecy of the oracle daughter of Delphi, which told of two possible outcomes for Sparta. The city would be destroyed by the Persians, or its king would die. Leonidas, aware of the prophecy, may have believed that self-sacrifice would save his city. Leonidas ordered the Greek fleet at the Strait of Artemisium to abandon its position and ordered most of the ground forces to withdraw from the battlefield. The remaining warriors ate to gather their strength. According to Diodorus Siculus, he said with a wry humor, "Eat your breakfast well, for tonight we will sup in hell." Ephorus and Diodorus Siculus relate that the king then made a bold and swift attack on the Persian camp. However, Herodotus' account describes the attack as initiated by the Persians. Xerxes did not rush the attack because Hydrane needed time to prepare. The warlord poured wine to the rising sun, a Persian devotion, and waited until mid-morning before launching his attack. Leonidas gave up a narrow mountain pass that could provide cover and positioned himself in an open area, which, despite the lack of cover, allowed him to deploy his forces more effectively and kill as many enemies as possible. The Greek warriors, knowing their end, fought furiously. When their spears were broken, the soldiers drew their swords and fought on. Eventually, he died. Minor skirmishes ensued around the body. The Spartan warriors charged and held off the Persian army long enough to save their king's lifeless body, and retreated to regroup on the heights behind the defensive walls when they saw the Hydarnes and the undead warriors arriving. Those with swords defended themselves, while the unarmed warriors fought with fists and teeth. In the end, the Persians successfully broke down the walls and surrounded the defenders, then continued to kill them with arrows to avoid close combat. Xerxes ordered the surviving Theban warriors to be branded on their foreheads as a symbol of slavery. Herodotus recalls that Leonidas was beheaded and his body was impaled. His and the dead warriors were buried on the battlefield. Later, a stone lion monument was erected as a memorial. The poet Simonides wrote a short epitaph for the martyrs. "Whoever passes by, tell the Spartans that they have fulfilled their oath." 40 years later, in 440 BC, Leonidas' remains were returned to Sparta. His tomb still stands near modern Sparta after the defeat at Thermopylae. The Greeks won great victories at Salamis and Plataea, where they completely defeated the Persian army. The king and his Spartan warriors boosted the prestige of the city-state and established